gas, war, COVID, and crime. Is the world ending? Who knows? I sure don't know. But I tell you, if it is, we're going to have you prepped on today's excellent edition of the worldwide edition of the Wayne Carlin and a special guest with us show. Let's get to it, man. Kick it. All right. That sounds good to me, man. All right, everybody. I just want to welcome you back to today's edition of the Wayne Carlin Show. You know, it's been a couple weeks. We were off last week, spending time in beautiful state of Utah, celebrating my wife's 60th birthday. I think I told you she ran a half marathon on her birthday, man. Beast mode. I was so proud of her.
That's
I
awesome.
didn't do it. I was just
awesome.
I stood on the side of the road with a sign saying happy birthday. That's me. But lots happening in the world. You guys, I know most of you are probably up on some of the things, but we're going to talk about it on today's edition. We call it the worldwide edition of the Wayne Carlin Show. And we have a special guest with us today who is an expert in some of these fields. And so we're going to hear from him. Yeah. So in fact, we're going to call it the Wayne Carlin.
There you go.
Yeah, I like that. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Wayne, and I'm from the West Coast, California, here in sunny California, where it's about 70 degrees today.
And I'm the first Carlin, and I'm representing the Gulf Coast. And we've got the second Carlin who's representing what do you call that? The East Coast? Or what kind of part of the coast do you all call that? You know,
it's
Florida?
The free coast.
The free coast? The
free coast.
Why is it free?
Because we live in freedom.
Oh, DeSantis, you talking about? Oh, okay. All right. It's in Florida. All right. So, hey, glad to be here, though. We got him today. And so we're going to have a really good show because the meat of the show is going to be about Ukraine and Russia, which is the #1 news item today in our country. And so we've got what we call our resident expert. And so I'm going to say this a couple of times so I don't stumble through it when we do it the official time. But I want to talk about his credentials because he's the race. He's our military attaché. He's our military expert. All right. And so we bring him in when we need to consult on these worldwide. And that's why it's our worldwide edition. We want to consult on worldwide military affairs. So that's what we've got. Retired United States Marine Corps Colonel Curtis Carlin. All right. So that's him. And then I'll cover all the deep stuff when we get later into the show. So let's go ahead. And Wayne, go ahead and tell them what we got on tap for our show today, because we really do want to go ahead and get started. So go ahead. Tell them.
Well, so as usual, we're going to do a little coverage on the pandemic. We like to talk about what's going on there. Is it over? Is it not? We're going to talk about something that's coming up really big with Erase Race, and that's the theory of racelessness. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then race dialogue. You know, Curtis Carlin and I were talking about how we both met Carlin. Boy, this is confusing. But it was based on it was based on dialoguing, and we don't always agree. I'm sure they didn't either, and we didn't. But yeah, we're still able to.
He's from Florida. I'm from Texas.
There you go.
Can't be agreement.
There you go. All right. And then, of course, we're going to finish up talking about the Russia-Ukraine situation. And that's when we're really going to be asking a lot of questions of retired Colonel Curtis Carlin. So let's get it, man. It's a lot of stuff going on. Excited about this.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get to our pandemic update, the latest. And I tell you what, it's really nothing but good news. And so we don't mind. And of course, for some of us, you know, it's been good news for a long time because we kind of looked at this and said, yep, it's something that we've got to address and attack and take precautions. But I mean, let's be reasonable about it. So let's look at these cases and our cases. And you've seen days when, as you see way back here where the cursor is, I mean, we just were having, I remember at one point, some of these, we had 1.5 million cases in one day in the country. That was amazing. But now you see, of course, we're down to where it says yesterday was 29,000 cases, almost the lowest that we've ever had. I went back and looked at some of the other time periods, and where I have the cursor here was June of this past year of 2021. And at that time, we were getting about 5,000 to 10,000 cases a day, almost there. We're almost there at the lowest ever. And so I'm wondering what kind of things people will be saying about, because I still find people talking about making provisions for, but COVID. I'm going, really? I mean, I remember making that point in 2021 where I was going, well, what is going to happen when we have 5 deaths a day? I mean, are we gonna still say we've got this big thing happening? We can't. So that's where we are now. Of course, deaths. Let's go look at the next one, and you should look at deaths. Of course, deaths lags behind, of course, the cases. So you see that it's not nearly as close to the lowest point. Nevertheless, it is got the direction we want it to trend, and that is all down. So a lot of good news on that. And for those who are skeptical, come on, get on board with the good news crew. It's all good. All right. Any points? Anything we want to say about the pandemic? Because we got a lot to move on to, but in case you all want to make some comments about the pandemic.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead, Wayne.
No, I was just going to say, we're slowly seeing, the science starting to agree with what we're seeing right here is that things are getting better. We can ease off on these restrictions. I mean, the CDC director was talking the other day, and she's pulling way back, and they're still hesitant. I think they're kind of clinging on to some of the old ideas that they had. But the one thing that my wife and I was discussing too is, where is Dr. Fauci? He's been kind of set to the side.
That's the question. That's the $100,000 question.
Right. We haven't seen him talk. We haven't seen him make any of these speeches he's been making. So I think he's been set aside in the corner, like, just be quiet. Let's move forward. So I'm excited about what we're seeing. Go ahead.
Not to make this a joke by any stretch or the seriousness of it, but a mentor of ours mentioned the other day he had a friend from Slovakia call him and say, hey, I think we need to give Putin the Nobel Prize for medicine. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, he single-handedly in 48 hours eliminated an epidemic. So
that's something. And that's something. So we jump from one fear thing into another one. I mean, it's, whoo. We moving on. There was one, you normally talk about sports, and there was one sports incident. We're not going to talk about any teams today, but there was a WNBA player who was arrested in Russia. I guess she was over there playing for a Russian team, but she was arrested coming through their customs, carrying, I think she had some kind of liquid cannabis oil or something like that. And so she's being held right now. She's facing possibly up to 10 years imprisonment in Russia. So with the war going on right now, and obviously we're not having good relations with them, I'm wondering what's going to happen. That's a pretty tough sentence. And she's a star in the WNBA. She's one of the the best players, tall, and one of the strongest players.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
All right. And it's bad time to be. I mean, because we're not like on Russia's good side. It's not like we can go and have some diplomatic means of rescuing her. So
she'll be used as a pawn.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So
well, I wanted to bring that up anyway. Let's dig into this racelessness topic. I can hardly say that, man. Tell me about this. What does that mean? Racelessness.
Hey, so we talked about this on last week's show. We talked about, because I was so excited because I wandered upon this, and actually when I showed it to Wayne said, you got a twin out there, because we had the same kind of concept. And so I began to dig into, and I actually made contact with Dr. Mason and heard that racelessness. And I was like, oh, this is great. I said, because at the end of the day, she's talking about the same thing that I'm talking about, and that is eliminating this idea of race. And so we're going to be expanding upon this in the coming weeks, because I'm going to have some conversations with her, and we're going to come up with a plan to get this out to everybody. She's got her plan, I've got my plan, and right now we're going to probably merge some of those things and hit the streets so we can talk about getting everybody to understand why it's so important for us to get rid of this concept of race. And so really good stuff. And I just like the fact that, whenever we're talking about these ideas of critical race theory and all these things, that you have someone, she's a PhD, so Dr. Mason, that she's got that intellectual level, because I'm just, retired Lieutenant Colonel Marine, and I study and read this stuff, and I've been into this stuff for years now. So I have some knowledge, but when I find people that have more knowledge about this thing, then I grab them. That's why I grab Curtis for things. I grab Wayne for things. I grab people who have deeper knowledge on some things. And that's what we're going to do with Dr. Mason on this racelessness. So at the end of the day, we're all going to be racing race very soon. Okay.
Yeah, that's exciting. When I look at this picture, she looks like one of my daughters, man.
She does, yeah. Yep.
All right. So, okay, let's move on, and let's spend a quick minute on advertising the race dialogue that we had recently about a month ago. Number one has been released. And now you're saying we might have a part 2 coming up as well?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So we did Race Dialogue 1, which is a 2-hour sit down with people. And we had a good number. We had, I think, ended up being 8 or 9 people. There was about 6 here. but it ended up being 8 or 9 people in that 2-hour session. And because we know that people have this short attention span and we want people really honed in on these things in each one, we broke it down into 4 parts. And so you can go out there and find that. Go to our Erase Racist Facebook page, click on the link and it'll take you there. You go to YouTube, you can find it on the channel there. But it's a 4-part series. And so we're going to be going further because the next one, Race Dialogue 2, because in this first one, everybody learned how to dialogue and we were very friendly to each other. So the next level is going to be, let's really attack these things. Let's find out where the disagreements are and let's address them. And so Race Dialogue 2 coming up soon. So
nice.
get
I'm
ready for
excited
that.
about that. Yeah, I'm excited about that. Okay, so let's get to the meat. Russia and Ukraine. I never served in the military. I got 2 retired military officers here who both were in war, who've seen what war is. So I'm going to rely on both of your knowledge, your experience. Kind of explain to us what you're seeing. I mean, we're looking at the news, but what's really going on? What's happening that we see it or we don't see? How do you guys feel about this? Talk to us.
Okay, I'm gonna start out because today normally I would have input, but I'm gonna defer now because we've got someone here, like I said before, with more knowledge than I have, and so we're gonna defer to him. I want to introduce Curtis Carlin, a retired Colonel of the United States Marine Corps. He's got a Master of Science in Military Studies. He was a senior fellow at the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. And so he's got a depth of knowledge. We call him at Erase Race, our military consultant. And he is our resident expert on this subject matter. So take that question that Wayne just posed to you, and how would you answer that? What do you think in the big picture as you look at this Russia-Ukraine conflict? How would you address that? Where are we? What are we headed for?
Well, that's a very deep and involved response, but I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I think we're looking this kind of 2-dimensional. And, we see Russia, we see Putin, we think he's this madman, the way he's being portrayed. And it's, hey, he's just trying to take a country. But I think there's a lot more at play here. I'm not a Russian-Ukraine specific expert, but I slept in a Holiday Inn Express and spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. So I can tell you that, Putin's not doing these things simply because he's a madman. I just can't buy into that. He's been too well trained and versed in the tactics of the Soviet bloc in the post-Soviet time. He is, what my opinion, always playing chess when oftentimes our responses are checkers. And so we keep responding. We don't have the initiative. He continues to take the initiative. So it is, I think, unique in the sense in the way it's unifying our country and the world, which I think will be played upon. And I think that we're seeing aspects like social media, and you're seeing McDonald's banning McDonald's, and you're seeing these social companies kind of stepping out and trying to take a lead in shaping policy, which I think is unique to this time period. You wouldn't see those types of things in the past. So those type of second, third order effects, because it's going to have a different effect on the peoples of Russia. It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of boils up to the oligarchy and the leadership of Russia. So it's a deep concern problem that I think goes well beyond Russia, and maybe we'll talk about that.
Oh yeah, we definitely want to talk about that, because it seems that, okay, so this thing is happening right here, Ukraine and Russia, and that's, of course, and I see that as almost like a pivot point for what's going to happen internationally around the world. What are the other significant second order, third order impacts around the world because of our engagement now, or because of the engagement that's happening here?
Yeah, so another great question. I don't believe, again, Putin is making this just from a 1v1, that I think this is something where, again, we all look at China, right? And you can obviously make the argument as to why Ukraine should be defended, because it is a sovereign nation. It's got 200 plus countries that recognize it as a sovereign nation. It got a very deep, long history tied with Russia, but we all recognize it as a unique and sovereign country. Yet, China, clearly Taiwan, I think there's maybe a dozen countries that recognize Taiwan as an actual country. We don't even recognize it. It's a one China policy with the uniqueness of Taiwan. And so, where does this play in with tit for tat with China, which again, you'll hear people discuss in that regard, but to kind of take it to the next step when you talk about pivot, the one thing I've seen, and when you study, we shocked the world when we took Iraq down in 1990, when you look at Desert Storm, because we had studied for decades on how to take apart a Soviet country, right? And how to take it apart very quickly, know its critical vulnerabilities, exploit them. We shocked the world when we did that. It was a peaceful time after, as the wall came down. But then 9/11 happens. We spent the last 20 years very focused on counterinsurgency and fighting the global war on terrorism. And you see the ramifications of that within our own military. China has been studying us just as hard as we studied the Soviet Union during that time. And they've absolutely recognized, because they're not limited by treaties that we've signed with Russia, they have exploited weapons and things of that nature. But they also are smart enough to know, as we pivoted out of the Middle East and now very focused on the Western Pacific, we used to have a 2-theater war military. We no longer have that. We made that decision 30 years ago. So now we have 1 theater war with other other abilities to handle smaller conflict. So when you start looking, when China knows, when the US puts its intellectual capital and money towards a problem, like how to militarily contain or defeat China, we're going to figure it out. But we're also in that precipice in between that time period. So it's kind of a long answer, but I hope there's value there, that I think China is weighing that aspect. I think they know that we've taken our response forces and flown them back into Europe, and now we're being tied down with some level of combat power, and then it becomes a scale game. So when you think about worst case, everybody's like, what's the worst case with Russia? I don't see a worst case going in with Ukraine. I think that's going to play out how it plays out. I don't believe in the nuclear option. I just don't see those things. I believe in cyber options, massive cyber options. But you really see it where it comes in with China and how that plays out within Taiwan, but how it spreads us as the global elephant. And they just keep getting it as their Achilles of the elephant. And they're trying to figure out how to make the elephant collapse.
What about, go ahead, Wayne.
I just want to say, because you mentioned other options, and I think about NATO. I heard a House member this morning say that if Ukraine was a NATO member, we would be willing to then do whatever to defend them, because that's part of the promise of NATO. But then he said, yeah, even though they're not a NATO member, people are still being hurt, people are still being injured. Why don't we, and we're giving them all the weapons anyway, Putin sees that as an act of war in a sense, why don't we just go ahead and do what we need to do? So it sounds like he was talking about send troops in. Yeah. What do you think about that? I mean, even though they're not NATO member.
Well, I can, again, I'm retired now, so I'm free to say a lot more. But I would tell you, I've got two young men who are my sons, who are in their 20s. As an American, not as a Marine, as American, I don't desire their blood to be shed on Ukrainian soil. I don't see it as our national interest, to the point where it's something that is going to conflict with who we are as a country. We need to support them. I believe we do need to do everything we can, use our our military emphasis to support and defend around. I think we should be confusing Russia. We should be doing some things that are on a different chessboard that cause them to have to recognize that we're serious. But I think we need to continue to crush them economically. I mean, they spend maybe, I think, 70 to 80 billion on their military each year. We're spending 700, 800 billion on our military. Now, wow. How efficient we are at that's another conversation. But that 70 billion is more percent of their GDP than we spend GDP on ours, which means their economy is very small. We are, I don't want to say they're a paper tiger, they're not, but they have this aura of being this great big might. They've got conscripts going into the front lines. Their Navy has so much rust in it. They've got some good ships, but you're starting to see, I think, the hollowness of some of the capabilities of Russia be exploited.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit then. So when you talk about that and the fact that they could be getting exposed, because people were shocked when Russia wasn't more dominant in the first few days of their campaign. And so when you look at that and you look at international, you look at China's, and then you look at the United States, in the pecking order, where does everybody stand? So if this was a conflict, number one, I want you to talk a little bit about what is the likelihood that China and Russia become buddies, and then how do we stack up military efficacy wise against that? Do we, where are we? Because, we always thought we're the baddest, we're the best. And we've always said that. Is that still the case? And how does that match up if we have to defend or have to go into a conflict against those two powers?
Yeah. So again, I'm not, Russia's, ace of spades is their nuclear, right? So we all recognize that. The state of it, who knows how actually good it is.
It might blow up in their silos when they try to launch.
But regardless, they've got a massive capability. China's got the capability there too. Their military, their ability to actually deploy forces and then sustain them. I mean, that's a massive, that's the uniqueness of our US military, is the fact that we can deploy and sustain global combat operations anywhere in the world. Right, that is unique to our country for the most part, especially in the size and scope. China is starting to get that capability. They're doing some things, obviously, around the world. You look at, but what I would tell you is you got to almost look at this through two lenses. There's a kinetic lens, which is warheads on foreheads and people killing each other out there. But you have the non-kinetic, which is the cyber and the space side. And I would tell you on the cyber and space side, that actually is more concerning for me when you look from an American perspective, because China's got legions and armies of cyber warriors. Russia has an extensive cyber capability, and what that could do if they were to go to war with us, with those two combined against the United States, that is the way that they would inflict the greatest harm on the American populace, right? I mean, we already know when a hurricane flows in someplace, we got 72 hours of water, place goes nuts, people are going everywhere. Well, what happens when you shut down those distribution sites, right? What happens when you hit critical infrastructure that is protected, but how well, who knows, right? What else we may or may not know. How many of those people are already in our country able to exploit some of those things? So that's the type of stuff where our daily life could be directly and greatly affected if those two actually did join up in that way. But I also believe in the resilience of the American spirit, and that would unify us in ways that we haven't been unified, and definitely in a generation at this point. And then they would see why this country is, what this country is all about. And we would work through that. We'd figure it out, and ultimately, I think they would feel our will come upon them.
Nice. I don't know how you feel about it. Carl and I have discussed this. So I'm a self-defense guy, martial artist. Firearms, I do all that. And so I respect the Ukrainians. I know they're using a lot of civilians now, and they're arming them. They're creating militias over there to fight against the Russians. What do you see? Let me reword it correctly. Do you think they will be effective in arming their civilians to fight this war? Will it be beneficial for them?
I think more about, what's the populace like, right? So you think about, they were under the red curtain, right? So the grandparents and the parents out there lived through Soviet domination, right? That life was hard. Their kids probably have been raised with the perspective of life is hard. And so I don't know a whole lot of Ukrainians by any stretch, but I'm willing to say at the heart of those Ukrainian 20, 30, and 40-year-olds, they're probably pretty hard individuals, or at least know what hardship is about. So when you take that type of person and you give them a weapon, how effective they are depends on who they're going against, right? If they're going against a squad of Marines, they're not going to be very effective. But if they're going against a bunch of conscripts and other Russian soldiers who don't have true leadership and don't have a real will to fight, which I think is part of this, that they're starting to see through, like, why are we here? What are we doing? They have some elite units that are going to decimate those civilians. But I think when you start getting into conscripts and things like that, who's got the will to fight, right? Who is actually going to, when it comes down to that fear factor and having to take either very moral or courageous action, who's going to be more willing to do that? Those who are bleeding on their own soil, or those who are going to die away from their family? So that's kind of my thought.
Wow. That's good. That's really good, because I had never really thought about it from that viewpoint, where you talk about the individual people and how are they, because, we do that with our kids. We talk, we always say, when I was a kid, and we go back, and then when you start doing that with people in other countries, you start, how are they raised? What have they come from? And yeah, we've lived a life of, we've had wealth and all this in American prosperity, but in these other countries, they're growing up kind of like we did in the 60s and 70s, where there was a lot of hard work ethic. And I think that answers the question why you see so many people coming to the fight. You have these people, of course, some of that might be propaganda that they're putting out, but you do see some people saying, hey, I put my wife and my kids on the bus or train, and I sent them off, and I'm coming back. And what were you? I was a shoe salesman.
They're not. They're not a true democracy with freedom. There's a lot of corruption there.
Right.
A whole nother story there. But they have experienced freedom over these last 30 years. It is a growing wave, and so they are getting that taste. And again, you want to see the fight in somebody, you take their freedom away, and I think that's why you're seeing that. And I think it's going to again continue to push against. For Putin to sustain, 150, 200,000, whatever that is, as they progress, that's a massive undertaking. And so I think that's where the economic impacts and all those other things each day, each week, each month that this drags on is going to really bog it down. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Again, my concern is, is there this other chessboard being played that we haven't seen yet? And we keep reacting to chess moves instead of creating the initiative on the chessboard.
That's good. That's really good. Hey, we're almost out of time here, Wayne. You got a final question for us?
Yeah. I just want, I'm thinking, man, this has been great. Appreciate all this information, because to be honest with you, a year ago, Ukraine, what? Yeah. Soviet Union, yeah, whatever. It just wasn't on my radar, for much of anything, but now obviously it is. So what do each of you personally see as a win or an optimal outcome for this Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Let me answer first, and we'll let the real expert go.
Okay.
I think that I would say the optimal would be that they actually, they come to the negotiating table, because I don't see anybody winning this conflict. It's almost like it's a no-win because of the way, as Curtis alluded to, that Putin has been playing chess and everybody else has been playing checkers. I think he's a step ahead, that he keeps NATO from getting engaged. We can't render the support necessary to Ukraine. We try to do some things, but it's really not enough to sustain them, because Russia can continue to send bodies. They can send bodies. And while they could take over the land there in Ukraine, then there'd be an insurgency, and it would last for years. And, you'd have this kind of stuff going on for years. It just would be a very bad situation. So I see as the optimal outcome that Zelensky and Putin both go to the table and they come up with something. I heard that Putin they were floating out of Russia that they weren't going to require Zelensky to resign. They were going to have, but I can't imagine him not being poisoned or something, something happening where they would allow him to stay there. So, but I think that would be the optimal outcome, that they come together, because everything else just is going to be bad for somebody. And in what I see right now, it's going to be bad for everybody. But I think there's going to be an opportunity for both sides to come out. Both people are going to be hurt right now, but they could come out of it with less damage in the future. All right. And now for my resident expert.
Yeah. Okay. So no, I think that's a good perspective. I mean, optimal is always a challenge to use that term when you're talking about war with countries and their lives and everything else at stake. But I think maybe, hopefully, Putin, everybody says he's overplayed himself and all that, or he's playing this because it's going to create him a fallback, right? So the fallback thought he was going to do, which was take those Eastern breakaway republics, and then secure the Black Sea access, and create new Russia. That's a lot easier to fall back to that once you say, well, I'll give the Western Ukraine and the capital, and hey, you know what, we'll go ahead and step away, but we're going to keep these Russian republics that have said they want freedom. They are my citizens of Russia, and we create new Russia. So that's probably where the middle ground is, someplace in that. I think that's unacceptable, because again, you've allowed a country to take over another sovereign nation, and we just back off again, like Crimea, right? It's Crimea 2.0. And so I don't think it's going to stop the thirst of Putin in other ways, but it would allow Putin to save face, and his people would support him. So there's not, again, I'm a most dangerous type of guy, not the best course of action, but the worst course of action. And that's where I still tie into the cyber and how much China has played into this that we're not tracking.
Wow. Well, thank you guys. I mean, your expertise, it goes a long way for us out here who don't understand it as deeply as you two do. Colonel Carlin, we appreciate your being here with us today. We got to get him back on, man. 'Cause
Yeah.
we're gonna need that knowledge.
Let's talk
and
race next time, man.
We had a little bit of race, but
Get our daughters in here too.
Oh yeah, we'll have to have a family
Yeah.
erase race thing. We can make that happen. So
Right on.
hey, but that's it. Until next time, hey, we appreciate you all joining in on today's edition of the Wayne Carlin Show, and we hope that you'll be back with us next time. And we glad to have our military consultant advisor, retired Colonel Curtis Carlin. We thank y'all. See you all next time.